So the other week I was out and visiting and talking with Mr. Dwayne. And I don't know if you know this about him. He served in the Navy, and he was telling me about his experiences serving on a destroyer boat. He called it a tin can. I'm just curious. Raise your hand here if you've been in the service in some form or another. All right. So yeah, you've been in the Navy. You understand what that's like. And he said it was interesting. They really looked forward. One of their jobs was they followed around, aircraft carriers, and when one of the pilots would time his landing incorrectly and end up in the drink, that they would go and fish him out, and then send him back over to the carrier. He said they looked forward to that because that's when they got ice cream. The pilot, in a show of appreciation, would send it back over. Now, it might seem obvious, but destroyers and battleships are very different than cruise ships. Raise your hand if you've ever been on a cruise ship. Right. Very different, I would imagine. Maybe if you've been on both a destroyer and a cruise ship, they're very different. In fact, if you can imagine through some mistaken boarding passes, if you end up with hundreds of people intending to go on a cruise that end up boarding one of those tin can destroyers, very quickly they would realize something's not quite right. The complaints would start. My bed's not really soft, and the cafeteria leaves much to be desired. Why is there no pool? David Platt makes this comparison in his book, Radical. And he says the differences between these two kinds of ships all has to do with their purpose. Both of them are designed with a very clear purpose in mind. One is designed to go and fight in battle, and the other is designed for people to have fun in comfort. And you can't really make a ship that does both well. You could take a destroyer maybe and increase the size of the cabins and put a bunch of windows, but you're taking out armor, and you get out to sea and you run out of ammo, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we used that room for the jacuzzi. You kind of have to pick one or the other. You can't really do both well. And so the question that David Platt asks in his book is, which of these describes the American church? When we talk about purpose, that purpose should define what we look like, what we act like, the kind of things that we do. You should be able, just like you walk into a destroyer and you can tell this was designed with a clear purpose in mind, you should be able to walk into any church in America and very quickly be able to tell what their purpose is. So as we've been talking about purpose in life, last week we looked at the book of Ecclesiastes, and for those who are outside of God, the utter lack of ultimate meaning and purpose. And before that, we talked about how we're not aimless in this life, we're to be working. And so we want to look at what exactly Jesus expects us to be doing when he comes back. Open to the book of Matthew, chapter 28. Starting in verse 18. So Jesus gave us a mission. This mission is to define everything that we do in the church. This is in the book of Matthew. Jesus has already died. He's come back to life. This is a very familiar passage to many people. And he gives the disciples some parting orders. Starting verse 18. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, so he said, because of everything that I've done, everything that's been given to me, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Jesus tells them, go in my authority, with my presence, and do my mission on earth. The main verb there is make disciples. Make disciples. It's really simple, church. The mission that we're given is to make disciples. Now, a lot of times when we talk about this passage, we talk about evangelism. The process of going outside the walls of the church, going to people who don't follow Jesus, and presenting the gospel. But that process of making disciples includes more than just evangelism. It's everything that we do. It's the process, not just, he says, baptizing them and teaching them. These are things you're going to be doing. So it's not just going and taking the lost people and baptizing them into faith. It is teaching them and molding them, that process of discipleship. We've talked about it even before that process of God reforming us into his image. Everything that we do here must fall under that mission. Every song that we sing, caring for the hurting, every ministry, every Bible study, everything that we do needs to fall under that purpose. Now, I understand there's not a church out there. You go to any church and you walk in and say, do you intend to make disciples? And you're not going to find a church that'll say no to that. But there's a difference between having a slogan as a church and being defined by your mission. You can name a cruise ship a destroyer. You can have the charter on the ship say, we're out to fight battles. But you look at the building and it might tell you different things. When I was going through Bible college, one of my classmates, he went to one of those Baptist churches that has been around since the creation of the mountains. And he was telling me about a massive church fight that they had. Huge problems. You know the cause of the problems this church was having? Some yahoo went and in the bulletin printed opening prayer instead of benediction. Same prayer, same position in the order of service, but because he had changed the word in the bulletin, massive problems. Jesus really had nothing to say about church bulletins. But there are some churches that have kind of shifted into making their purpose, the reason for existence, maintaining the old way things are done. This is the USS Constitution. Really cool. I'd love to go see it. It is a living link to the past. It's out on the East Coast. And they preserve the old ways of seafaring. They actually use sails. And you can go on there and they'll teach you about the ways that hundreds of years ago they used to go out and sail. It is really cool. Its purpose is to preserve the old way of doing things. But I'll tell you, if you were to try and take the USS Constitution into warfare today, it would not really turn out well. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul writes about working with two different groups of people. He says he's worked with the Jewish people who follow the laws of the Old Testament. He describes them as those having the law. And then he talks about working with Gentiles. The Jews viewed everybody in two categories. You're either a Jew or a not. Jews and the Gentiles were just everybody else. So this is what he has to say about working with them. Though I am free and belong to no one, he says, look, nobody's making me do this. I have made myself a slave to everyone. I think they should read that to pastors when they get ordained. I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law. So he says, look, when I'm with Jewish people and ministering to them, even though in Christ we're freed from the obligations of the Old Testament, he says, I live like them to minister to them. Amen. So as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, he says, when I'm around pagans, I became like one not having the law. Though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law. So it says, look, when I'm around the pagans and the Gentiles, it's like I'm not joining their wild parties, but I'm not living under the Jewish customs and traditions. Gives us reasons. So as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. Now, Paul's life and service was defined by work outside of the Jews. Can you imagine the conflict he felt as he set aside generations of tradition to reach these people? I mean, sometimes we have a hard time giving up any kind of tradition. There's nothing wrong with tradition, but we have a hard time changing things. And these weren't just traditions. These were traditions given by God. God did not write that bulletin in that church. But God had told the people, observe the Passover. They'd been doing it for generations uncounted. And yet in the early church, they decided, as these pagans come in the doors, we're not going to make them learn that. Can you imagine the conflict this causes in a mixed church? You got people walking in the doors and they're not dressed like good Jewish people. They're not even worshiping on Saturday. Can you imagine if we just changed church from like Sunday to Tuesday? I'm sure that's what it felt like to them. These pagans are coming in, he says, to reach them, I gave up all of that to reach them for Christ. Can you imagine the first time one of these pagans, not knowing any different, brings bacon to a church potluck? With the Jews present? So very early on in the life of the church, from the beginning, they chose to set aside all of that to win people to Christ. Now understand, he's not telling Jewish people, he's like, look, when I minister to Jewish people, I live by their traditions. He's not like going and trying to tell, oh man, Jewish people, look at the Gentiles, they're so cool. Man, we gotta live like them. Some churches fall into the opposite trap, right? And their goal, their mission is to be as cool as possible. And they look at the world and they say, CEOs, please tell us how to do things. We want to be as cool and as hip as possible. So you got pastors wearing skinny jeans. I'm sorry, maybe you're ministering to the skinny jean wearing crowd. I don't know if I can do that. Amen? Okay. And so, some churches, they fall into the trap of just trying to be cool and modern, and that is like the end goal. And that can be just as oppressive as a church that is dominated by an adherence to tradition. This is my favorite plane in the world, the A-10 Warthog. It's an ugly plane. It's been in service for like 40 years. This thing was launched in 1975. It's cheap, it's ugly, and it's effective. It is really, there's a reason it's been around for 40 years. They keep bringing it back out for time because it is so effective in what it does. This is the F-35. This is the new generation of fighter plane. Our government estimates that it will cost $1.5 trillion by the end of its run. I can't even wrap my mind around how big of a number that is. The ironic thing about this is, at the end of this production, it's not even ready. They're having all kinds of glitches and budget overruns, and they're trying to put the latest and greatest technology into it. They're not even certain when it's done that it will be better than the A-10 at what it does. That close to the ground, nitty-gritty fighting, blowing up tanks. They're like, we're going to spend $1.5 trillion on it. We're not even entirely sure that it's going to be better than what we have in certain roles. Just throwing money at something and putting in new technology does not necessarily make it more effective. I read a heart-breaking self-assessment that a megachurch had done. They had a budget of millions of dollars, thousands of people attending their services, the latest and greatest of technology and speaking methods and management techniques. And they said, but they looked at what they were doing. They said, are we making disciples? And the quote they said, what we have done is we have made a lake that is a mile wide and an inch deep. All of these people that are coming here, they're just attending. We have failed the one purpose that Jesus gave the church. So, we use Facebook here at this church, but we don't have a website. We use YouTube. I'm preaching from a tablet, using a PowerPoint slide. But we're not doing these things to try and look cool. We're using these tools because they're incredibly effective. That's how we measure what we do and what we don't do. That's how we decide the things that we change and the things that we keep. We say, how do we best make disciples? 6 times in that paragraph in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 6 times Paul says, I want to win the lost. Everything that he did, everything came down to that. He wraps it up, 1 Corinthians 9:23. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. That's the only measuring stick. That is our mission. So when we have that age-old struggle, and every church deals with this all the time. So when we read 1 Corinthians and understand they're struggling with old stuff and new stuff, and oh man, imagine them deciding what songs to sing, right? These pagans don't speak Hebrew. You know the answer to that question? Are we going to be a modern church or a traditional church? No, we're going to be a disciple-making church.
Amen.
That's all I care about. So if that means that we sing hymns, if that means we use PowerPoints or whatever, I don't really care about the methods that we use, as long as they're honoring Christ and we're making disciples. That is what an effective church looks like.
Amen.
The other struggle that we deal with in the American church, and I think this is a lot of times harder to deal with in the whole traditional versus modern thing, is personal preference. What are we in America? We're consumers, right? We walk into every store, every product we use, and we have an expectation, right? My expectation, I go into the store, I expect every feature of that store, that person smiling at me from behind the counter, everything is supposed to revolve around me and my experience in that store. And if I don't like it, I'm going to go leave a nasty review online. Right? What is the most anguished cry of the American? I didn't like it! It was inconvenient to me. Can you imagine somebody going to service and going to their drill sergeant? I really like what you all have going on this whole boot camp thing. But I just have a few complaints about your customer experience. A couple suggestions that you can just do to improve the quality. No! And it's so ironic, like, you can go on Facebook, you give a church a star rating, and people say stuff like, I liked my experience. That's what cruise ships do, people. Cruise ships give you a list of programs you might enjoy. Right? And that's what engineers, everything they do on a cruise ship, right? They say, what will people have fun doing? You go on a cruise ship looking, and you're looking through that list of programs. Oh, I'm not going to like that. I'm not going to go to that. And here's something I might enjoy doing. Warships give you a mission that you're going to accomplish. You go and ask people on a boat, what are you here for? And if you talk to people who are in military service, every one of them has a clear and defined role. Mr. Dwayne just wasn't like a tourist looking over the side of that boat on that destroyer. He had a specific role and a function that he filled during his time there. You go and ask people on a cruise ship, well, what are you here for? TV. We're here to have fun. Oh, you must be looking for one of the staff people. See, there's a small number of people here, and we pay them to make sure we're all having a good time. Now hear me on this, church. We have a good time here at church, right? Right? Like, we have fun. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a really poor mission to have as a church. Acts chapter 1. Jesus, after he gives his disciples a great commission, this is kind of the tagline on that. And he tells them to wait in Jerusalem. He says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem where you're living, in all Judea, the country around you, and Samaria, that country you really don't like, and to the ends of the earth. So he gives them again. He says, just to be clear, I want to remind you guys, you got a mission to do, right? Right? This news, this gospel can't just stay in Jerusalem. You've got to go everywhere. You look at the first couple chapters of the book of Acts, and a lot of times we romanticize the early church, that Acts chapter 2 church that we want to be. You know what they were failing to do completely? They were failing to go outside of Jerusalem. They were happy. They were teaching. They were praying together. They were worshiping. But they were doing all of that in Jerusalem, and they were not accomplishing the mission that God gave them to do. So you know what God did? He allowed a man named Saul to come against the church. The church experiences the first martyr as Stephen dies. The verse after that, Stephen is killed. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. They stayed there. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout where? Judea and Samaria. God used some very uncomfortable things to nudge the church out the door, to get them focused on the mission he had given them. God did it through suffering and death. So hear me, church, our mission is more than just being comfortable. Now, do I want you to enjoy the messages? Yes. And unfortunately, sometimes in the church, they'll say something like this as an excuse for poor preaching or, just horrible, stuff that they're doing, or like just totally not caring. Well, you're here for a mission. Maybe you experienced that in the service. You have somebody who's just capricious and, tortured you. And no, that has nothing to do with accomplishing the mission. But let's not okay, let me phrase it this way. There's good problems to come to me with, and there's bad. If you come and say, Pastor Aaron, I like when you wear blue shirts. Okay. Does that have anything to do with making disciples? Not really. Now, if you could come to me and say, Pastor Aaron, I really believe we could make better disciples in this church if you just wore the color blue more often. It'd be an interesting conversation to have. So my goal is not to have everybody happy all the time in the church. Have you ever tried to make everybody happy? It's impossible. So now people who are pursuing Christ in their life, they're going to be joyful serving in a church that does the same. But we need to evaluate everything that we do. And sometimes it's hard to look at it from those fresh eyes. why do we do this? Look at the building that we have. And I say all this, and I really believe that this church, one of the things that attracted Sarah and I to this church, and I've come to love even more since, I'm not preaching to you guys saying you're not doing this already, okay? I believe that this church wants that mission to be at the center of everything. But I just wanted to make it really clear as we go forward. I'm sure I'm going to change stuff. I'm sure we're going to do new programs and projects. And anything that we do, let's just understand from the outset what our goal here is. We're here to make disciples. Our goal is to see, yes, people come in the doors, but we want them to resemble Jesus. Our goal is to do more than just survive as a church. Oh, that's hard. I talk to pastors and day in, day out strugglers. Just are we going to be able to open the doors next week? But our goal is more than that. Our goal is more than meeting the budget this year. I hope we do. But our goal goes beyond it. We want to do stuff. I want you to be able to invite people to this church and not to say, come to our church, we made budget this year. It's a horrible thing. Come to our church. Everybody always leaves it. Well, some people might be looking for that. Come to our church. We are accomplishing things for God's kingdom. Come to our church. We're making disciples. Come to our church. We are joining what God is doing. That's what people want to come and be a part of. And that's the goal that we're aiming for. Now, we're going to continue the next couple of weeks, and we're going to expand on that theme and understand that each set of mission, you have a purpose and a goal in mind. There are rewards and there are sacrifices. But let's agree on the mission. Let's pray. God, I pray for this church and the people that make it up. God, you have very clearly stated what we are to be about. Now, God, there's many other good things that we can be doing. There are many other causes, there are many other programs. But in all these decisions, God, that you would just set our hearts on fulfilling the command that you gave us, that we're to be making disciples. God, help us to be all things to all people, to do all of it for the gospel. In Jesus' name.